All right, we've got the initial configuration set up. Let's move to the next level by using the SDM and DHCP server configuration. Now, this is the next phase, I guess you will, in the setup of a Cisco router. Now, it's interesting. One of the big things that Cisco introduced when they revised the CCNA certification and the CCNA exams at the near the end of 2007 is they introduced this new SDM utility. Now, we'll talk about what it is, but it was kind of a monumental change for Cisco's logic because it's a graphic interface that you can use to manage the Cisco devices. So we're going to take a look at what that graphic interface is, what it's used for, what it can be used for, why they've introduced it into this program, and all of that. We'll kind of group all that into what is the SDM. We'll then turn on the router for the SDM by enabling it for SSH. That's one of the things that kind of partners with the initial setup. It's what we did on the switches. And by doing that, we'll also prepare it to get ready for the SDM. Finally, we'll use SDM to configure our router as a DHCP server. So we'll get that set up, and I'd like to even go a little further because I want to show you the commands that you have in the iOS that allows your router to be a DHCP server as well. Well, let's start off with an explanation of what the Cisco SDM is. It's short, the acronym stands for the Security Device Manager. So it is the Cisco Security Device Manager. And it's kind of funny because that's what it was originally created to be, meaning that Cisco wanted to come up with a way to secure your Cisco device, your Cisco router, or different devices by having this little wizard that you would walk through. And that's why they created this SDM. So you could walk through a wizard without having all the knowledge of security and lock your device down. But they just kept adding features and adding features to it to where it's now a full-blown graphic user interface, or GUI, that you can use to manage and configure your router. You can even monitor your router, see the traffic, all kinds of stuff. So it's just grown bigger and bigger and bigger into a full-blown application, but it's still called the Security Device Manager. Yes, it still can do the security stuff, but it does much more as well. Now, it is web-based. It's actually a Java application, so you'll need to have Java installed on whatever PC you'd like to manage it. And it works on all mainline Cisco routers. And what I mean by mainline is mainstream, like the main devices that you see in organizations, like the 2800, 2600, 3600, 3800, 1800, 800 series, the ones that I was just working with. It's essentially a GUI that manages all their mainstream routers. The non-mainstream ones are the extremely advanced ones that you see in service providers, and by that point they figure you're not really using a GUI anymore, so you don't have much need for that, or just really old routers like the 2500 series routers don't support the SDM just because they are decades old. So this is designed, the SDM was designed to allow iOS configuration without extensive knowledge. Like up to this point in the series, you have learned a lot, but not everybody knows what you now know, meaning they buy their Cisco devices and they just, well, what do I do now? And Cisco was getting hammered by the competition who was making devices that didn't do everything that Cisco devices do, but people were buying them because they were cheaper and required no knowledge, meaning they plugged them in and some magical wizard pops up that's like, let's configure your device. And people are like, hey, this is great. I don't need to learn anything and I can get this set up. So that is why they've also introduced the SDM into the mainstream certification courses. The most recent that was introduced at the end of 2007 was the CCNA program, and at the CCENT level, which is what this video series matches to, Cisco expects you to be able to do common things using the iOS, like the stuff we've talked about so far, such as IP address configuration, security configuration, setting up for Telnet, and all that sort of thing. But they say the more complex configurations can be done using the SDM. As you move further and further in your certification journey into the Cisco world, you'll see less and less of the SDM and more of learning the command line, because that's really how you can get into the nitty-gritty, and there's no graphic interface that can give you the flexibility of a command line. with that being said, there's a lot of benefits to using a graphic interface where you can go click, click, and do what would typically take you 30 minutes to do using a command line in 10 seconds. Before we move into the configuration or configuring your router to support SDM, there's one more thing that I want to mention, and that is where to get it from. SDM typically ships with all of the routers on the flash, meaning on the flash of your router when you buy it from Cisco or buy it from some reseller, it will come with the SDM. So if you point your web browser at the router, it will automatically open up the SDM and you can manage it from there. Now, with that being said, there's a lot of routers that either are older, like the 26 or 3600 series, and they don't have the SDM on it. Or, for instance, me, when I first get a router, the first thing I do is blow everything away on the router. I erase all pre-existing configs, I erase the flash, put on my most recent iOS version. So even if it did have SDM on it, I wipe it out. So to get the SDM utility itself, you can actually go to www.cisco.com. It's got a little redirection up here. The actual URL is www.cisco.com/go/SDM, just like you see right there. And as soon as you hit enter, it redirects you to that URL that you can see. Now, it gives a little introduction of what the SDM is, tells you a little bit about it, what routers support it, pre-installed on all of these different ones, supports, available free of charge for all these routers. So it's not something that you have to buy. That's a good point to bring up. So if you need it, you can just click on this download software link over on the right-hand side. It'll come up to this software page, and right down here you can see I've got it highlighted, Cisco Router and Security Device Manager. So that's where you can do it. It does require a login. You can see the little lock and key right there, and that you just need to register with Cisco or get a support contact from them, and they'll give you a username and password where you can download that. Now, once you download that, when you install it, it will give you the opportunity to install it on your computer, meaning it's installed on your PC, on the router, meaning it will copy itself to the flash of your router, or it will install on both. Now, this is pretty cool. Not many people understand the difference between all these things. I didn't when I first set it up. I thought, well, just, I guess, put it on both. But the idea is this. You've got your PC. Let me just draw a little figure here. Here's our PC that is connected to some switch or whatever and eventually reaches the router. Now, if you install SDM on the flash of the router, meaning it's only on the router, that means I can go to any PC and actually just point it using a web browser to the router's IP address. And if I set up the router correctly, it will start downloading the SDM to my PC from the router and start running it from there. The disadvantage of doing that is anything that runs from the flash of your router is going to be slow. So it's going to take longer to load up. Things won't operate as smoothly and as fast as if you actually had it installed on the PC. Now, here's the cool thing. I love this. If you install it on the PC, only on the PC, and not in the flash of the router, or you could have it there, I guess, you actually run the program locally from the PC. Then you can point it to whatever IP address of whatever routers that you want to manage, and it will be able to manage them without actually having to install the SDM on each one of those routers. It runs faster, it runs smoother, and you don't have to worry and go, oh, did I install it on that router? Is it in the flash? Am I wasting flash memory storing all these SDM interfaces when I don't have to? So that was a very cool option they came out with probably about 2-3 years ago now, where you can install the SDM on a local PC and you don't have to put it in the flash of the router. All right, regardless of where it's installed, you can configure your router to support SDM using these 5 steps. Now, most of these 5 steps is the same thing that you would do when you were configuring your router to support SSH. Now let me bring up a console connection to our router, and this is the same process we went through when we set up the switch to support SSH, but it'd be a good time to review it now. Actually, I just brought up a telnet connection right there to our router that we were configuring in the previous video because it's already set up for remote management using telnet. So I'm going to log in using the password Cisco, CBT router, type in enable, Cisco. Let's move into global configuration mode, configure terminal, and once we're here, we need to walk through the process of setting up our router for SSH. Now I've got the steps right behind here on the slide. Number one is to generate encryption keys, and that is used in SSH and HTTPS. That's secure web surfing, which is what we have to use, well, what we should use for the SDM. The SDM will support HTTP, which is non-secure web surfing, but it's kind of dangerous because people could open a packet sniffer like Wireshark and find out all of the commands that you're sending to the router through the SDM. So that's not very good. So where was I? Logged in. Now, in order to generate the cryptography keys, meaning the encryption keys that are used to secure our communications, first thing we have to put is a domain name. So I'm going to type in IP domain name, and let's give this the router the domain name nuggetlab.com. Enter. So I've assigned the domain name because that domain name is used when we generate our encryption keys. Now I can generate the keys themselves. I'll type in crypto, hit the question mark. Right, we go into crypto key, question mark. I want to generate them, question mark. Says, do you just want to hit enter and generate some general keys or RSA keys? RSA keys are the keys that we use to secure SSH and HTTPS, along with many other things on our routers. So hit the question mark after that, and it says, do you want to generate general keys or usage keys? Now we're jumping into stuff that you get into the security track, but just to give you an idea of what these are, you can use general keys that are, it's kind of like a universal encryption key. It works for whatever you don't specifically assign them for. So if I don't say I want to use this key for that and this key for that, it'll use the general keys. Now usually that's okay because if I generate some general keys on my router, it will work for everything that I don't specifically assign a different encryption key for. Usage keys is when I want different keys. It's like having different locks on your doors in your house instead of having the same universal lock that one key works for every door of your house. So, you know, I've noticed all along it's had this carriage return, which means it will just prompt me for whatever information it needs. So let's hit the enter key. It comes up and says the name for the keys will be cbtrouter.nuggetlab.com. So that way when somebody connects to this, it'll say this is my encryption key for this router. By the way, if you ever change your router's name or domain name, just like we generated before, after you generate these encryption keys, you'll have to regenerate them to match the new name or domain name. So it says choosing a key modulus greater than 512 may take a few minutes, but that's usually what's recommended. I always use 1024-bit encryption on everything that I generate. And it says, I am now generating your keys. Okay, so we've now got the encryption keys and we're good to go. Next step. It says turn on the HTTP or HTTPS servers for your router. You do that from global config mode by typing in IP HTTP, and you can see all these different options. I just want to turn on the server. You can see the description says enable the server. So right click and hit enter. Now that turns on the server itself for HTTP. Now that is the TCP port 80, like we've all come to know and love. The problem with HTTP is that it's not secure. Meaning, yeah, it generated those encryption keys, but normal HTTP isn't the one that I want. So I'm going to also turn on the IP HTTP, you can see it right here, secure server. By the way, if you're curious, I'm using Terraterm, which allows me to right-click anything that I highlight, and it automatically copies and pastes it down here. So if you're wondering, that's amazing, how are you doing that? That's how I'm doing it. Just highlight and right-click in Terraterm. It's kind of cool. So by hitting enter on that, it now supports port 80, which is the normal unencrypted version of HTTP, and it supports port 443, which is the more secure encrypted version of HTTP. Cool. So I've got those servers turned on. Now it says I need to create a privilege level 15 user account. Now just so you know, privilege level 15 is the highest privilege you can get on a Cisco device. A lot of people call privilege level 15 the enable mode. For instance, when I came onto this router and typed in enable and moved into the privilege mode access, that's considered level 15. I can do whatever I want. So to create a user account, this user account is going to be used when somebody comes to the web page of this router and wants to use the SDM. You don't just want to say, oh yeah, okay, everybody come on in, use this GUI and do whatever you want to our router. This user account will be what's used to secure that. So I'll type in username, and my username is Jeremy. Hit the question mark. It's got a bunch of options for this username, but the one I'm looking for is the privilege level. I want to say Jeremy is privilege level 15. That's the highest privilege level that you can get. Hit the question mark, and then it says, what do you want to do? I can type in password, which specifies the password for this user, or if you have a newer router, you can actually type in username Jeremy secret, and then what password you want. Now rack your brain. What's the difference between password and secret? Well, one of them is unencrypted. That's the, if you think back to our old commands, enable password command sets the privilege mode password and it's not encrypted in the running config. Or I can type in enable secret in a password and that will encrypt it. It does the same thing with these user accounts. I can just type in username Jeremy password whatever, which will be unencrypted, or secret whatever, and it will be encrypted. Regardless of which way I choose, the password will work either way. It's just how it stores it on the router. So when somebody does a show run, they'll either see my password or they won't. Just because I've got it highlighted, let's use the password. I'll hit question mark. It says you can either type in a 0, which means unencrypted password will follow, a 7, which means a hidden password will follow. A lot of times you can type in 7 if you're going to type in an encrypted version of the password. Again, think back. You remember the type 7 encrypted passwords that were very easy to break? Well, if you have the encrypted version of the password, you can put a 7 before you type it and it will take that. Or I can just type on line, which means whatever password I want will follow. Well, I'll just type in Cisco. That's my password. Remember, line in all capitals means type in whatever you want for that. Enter. So I've now created my privilege level 15 user account that will be used to access the web interface. Now, step 4 says configure your VTY ports for privilege level 15 and to use the local user database. You know what? Grab my pen here. Addition, VTY and HTTP access. Bonus information on the fly. HTTP access to use privilege level 15. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm in global config mode. I'm going to type in IP HTTP question mark, and you can see one of the systems here is authentication. I type in IP HTTP authentication, and I'm going to say use the local database. Now, I believe that's in there by default, but I always like to type it. Now, what this does is tell the HTTP server, how do you want to authenticate people or ask for their username and password when they come to this router? We can actually set it up to say, well, the person that comes to manage this router from the web interface has to know the enable password. Or I can say, well, go ahead and use the local user database, meaning the username that I just created up here, or usernames if I have multiples that I created, to authenticate these users to manage the device. So that says that secures the HTTP server. Now let's also secure the VTY ports. I'm going to type in line VTY 0 space 4 to get them all at the same time. And remember I typed in login before to require logins to this port? I'm going to follow that up with login local, which says use the local database to check for the username and password when somebody telling us to this router. Now, I don't know if you caught it, but early on, let's go back up here. When I telnetted to this router, when we were first getting it set up, when I first started this config, it said, what is your password to log into this router? Watch what happens now. Now that I've typed in the login local, let me bring up a new connection. Let me just drag it in the window here. I'll go File, New Connection, and I'm going to telnet to this router. Click on OK. Give it a second. My computer's not the fastest. And it will come up and say, this secure router, user access verification. Look at that. It's saying, what is your username? Where before we did this command right here, before we typed in login local, it just said, what is your password? Because when I typed in login, right here without the local after it, which is what we did when we initially configured this router, that instructed the router, go ahead and use the password under the VTY lines. Remember, we typed in, after we typed in login, before I typed in password under the VTY lines, Cisco, which was the password we're going to use. But by typing in login local, let me jump back over here before it times out, it's saying use the local database. So now I can type in Jeremy, password of Cisco, and actually log into the router. You notice something weird? You noticing anything weird here? Well, let me just jump back. Let me try and point you what I'm catching. When we logged in before, and I asked for the password, notice what mode I came into. User mode, right? So from user mode, I then had to type in enable and get into privilege mode. But look at what happened on this guy. When I typed in my username and password, all of a sudden, poof, I'm in privilege mode because my user account was assigned privilege level 15. I went straight to privilege mode without being required to do anything else. Pretty awesome. I kind of like that. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, oh, well, I like the enable password as one more password you have to type. Well, if that's the case, then don't assign your user accounts privilege level 15. Okay. So we've got the VTY ports and so on. Now I have installed Java on your PC. If you haven't already, just about every PC that I know has Java because it's used all over the web when you surf the web. And access the router either using a web browser. Let me put if SDM is installed on your router. I'll put is on router. Or if you've installed it on your PC, you can click on Start and go to Programs, and somewhere in there you will actually see the Cisco. Sorry, I'm actually doing this as I talk. Somewhere in there you will see the Cisco SDM icon, which will bring this up. It says SDM will be launched from the PC using the default browser. Type in the device IP address or hostname. Well, the IP address of my router is 192.168.1.1. And it says, by the way, does this device have HTTPS enabled? And do you want to use it? Well, yes, it is, because I turned on that IP HTTP secure server. I want this to be encrypted when I manage this device. So I click on Launch. And behind the scenes, it's actually opening the SDM in Internet Explorer. It says, enter the device IP address one more time. Internet Explorer has this little jump off page. I'll put 192.168.1.1. Click on Start. Now it's asking me, the server at level 15 requires a username and password. Now you can guess it. I already created it, Jeremy, and I'll put in my password of Cisco. Click on OK. And now it is loading up Java on my PC. You can see loading SDM. Please wait. Our little hourglass is ticking. It says this will open another window. Don't require this or don't close this window. I'm glad I'm keeping this live while I'm opening this because a lot of people get confused. They're like, oh no, another username and password. It's the same one that you used when you initially logged in. This is actually the Java login. You're required to log into the web interface, and then Java requires an additional login, which is the same username and password as you used before. You click on OK. It's authenticating. Oh. I must have, there we go. I typed in my password that I use for everything. Yeah, do you have that too? Do you have one password you use for everything? That's probably the worst thing you can ever do, but everybody does it. So anyway, we've got the SDM that is now loaded up. Now you can see right here, it's identifying, it's going through, it's loading up as we speak, identifying the model of router. You can see the 851W, how much flash or memory is available, how much total memory, that's RAM, is installed. The total flash is below. What iOS version are you running? What SDM version are you running? Host name, all of that. This page that we're seeing right here, let me kind of center it, is the initial page that gives you a good summary of what's currently on your router right now. It says the total supported LAN interfaces is 2. DHCP servers not set up yet. That's what we're going to do. Total WAN interfaces. I don't have any WAN interfaces installed on this router. It just has LAN interfaces, 2 main Ethernet ports, firewall policies currently inactive, VPN, all of the information, just a summary information of what's going on right here on this router. Now, you'll notice across the top, we've got the Home tab, Configure tab, and Monitor tab. Refresh will refresh it if you think anything changed on this router. It reloads your config into the SDM. You can save your config by clicking this. This does a copy running config start using the GUI, and then you can search. Now up top, we also have some menus. File menu, which allows you to reset your router to factory default, save your config to the PC, which is kind of a nice backup utility. Preferences for SDM. We'll look at some of these later. The view, what you want to go to, the tools menu, you can ping, you can telnet, run a security audit. This router has wireless on it as well, so we can run our wireless application. I don't know why Vista's doing this little circle thing. Just Vista thing. You can see update SDM. You can actually download the new version, however you want to do that. So a lot of options that we have just using this. Okay, so this is the initial SDM. Man, my mouth is dry. I've been talking for a little while. You know what? We've got the SDM configured right now. And I'm looking at the time and where we're at. I think what I'm going to do is I would say this is a good video right here, meaning I was thinking of getting into the DHCP side, but I'm going to split this. I'm going to add DHCP to this video part 2. So I'm sure you already know, you're looking at the table of contents for the series and you know there's a part 2, but right now I didn't know there was going to be a part 2 until I realized just how much time I talked about SDM. So this is the SDM. Before I wrap this video up and get into part 2, let me just show you these tabs. Configure tab is where you can go in. Let me scroll up a little bit here. Go in and configure many things on your router using an automated wizard. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these right now. We'll do that as we configure different aspects. But for instance, we set up the interfaces on our 851 router in the previous video using the command line interface. Now it says, do you want to create a new connection like wireless or Ethernet? Or look at this tab. You can see we've got tabs to edit the interface. And if you take a look, you can see the two interfaces that we set up in the previous video. Notice the description that I have right here is Internet WAN port. I did that using the command line in the previous video. And let's say, I wanted to change the IP address. Well, from the command line, I would go into global and move into interface config and all that. Using SDM, look at this. Buttons. I'll just click on edit. Says what kind of what do you want to set this interface as? Is this a LAN interface or a WAN interface? I'll say, well, this is a LAN interface. Says, well, let me just deliver a few commands to the router right there. And then it brings up the edit dialog box where I can go in and change the IP address, type in the subnet mask, or you can use the bit notation over here and say, oh, it's a /27 or so on. You have, association of access lists to restrict things. NAT configurations, we'll be doing this in a little bit. General, what are some of the general aspects that you want to set under the interface. Application service, now I'm starting to dig myself into a hole because we haven't talked about some of these. These are quality of service policies and net flow policies, but we're not going to get into that in this series. Overall, this allows you to set this device up and set this interface up using a graphic interface rather than using the command line. The thing that I don't like about SDM and the command line and things like that is, did you see what happened when I clicked on this and hit edit? It's not going to do it anymore. Where it came up and said, is this a LAN interface or WAN interface? And I said, oh, it's this LAN. And I clicked on OK. And it's like, oh, I'm going to deliver 3 commands to your router right there. Did you notice that? I don't like that. Freaks me out. I'm kind of like, what'd you do? You know, it's kind of like, what'd you deliver? You know, did you like take over the world or something? You know, what commands did you send to my router? So one of the things I do anytime I start using the SDM is I immediately go to the edit menu and choose preferences. And one of the options it will give you, and I love it, is this preview commands before delivering to router. So if I check this box and hit OK, anytime I do something, like let's say, you know, I want to configure this WAN interface, and I click on edit, and I say, well, let's change the let's make this 99, you know, as my WAN interface IP address. I click on OK, and it says, here is the commands that I will be delivering to the router. Preview. Would you like to do this? So I can click on deliver to send those commands over, or just save it to a file, which means I can go manually type in those commands. Isn't that hot? I like it because now I can save it to a file and I can say, you know what? I'd rather learn the command line way of doing this than just using the GUI to do everything. So, you know, I could just go ahead and say, well, you know, I see those commands right there. So why don't I just open my command line, whoops, right here, and do those commands. You know, I can keep them both up on the screen and, you know, get under the interface and type in that command so I can learn how to do it from the command line using the GUI as a guide to show me exactly what I need to do. So a lot of very cool options in this GUI. To help you not only perform tasks, but to learn what you're doing as you go. So in this video, we've seen the graphic interface that you can use to manage your Cisco devices, and we've defined what the SDM is all about. It's a lot of times a breath of relief for a lot of people that start dealing with Cisco because they can do it without learning all the complex iOS commands. We also saw enabling the router for SSH and secure or HTTPS-based SDM. So everything that you do will be encrypted between managing those different devices. One more thing I should mention. We did enable the router for SSH by generating the crypto keys and creating the user account. One more thing that we would need to do, and we did this on the switch, we need to go under those telnet ports and type in transport input and then what protocols we want to allow to access these VTY lines. I'll say I still want to allow telnet even though it's not preferred, and I'll say I also want to allow SSH. That will allow me to access the router however I want using SSH or telnet, or by the way, I could also type in transport input all, and that would accomplish the same objective of allowing all protocols to access this. If I only wanted telnet or only wanted SSH, I could just type in transport input one or the other. That is enabling the router for SSH fully. In the following video, I'm going to do this final bullet, which is using the SDM to configure your router as a DHCP server. So for now, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.